So SB 91, I actually teased that out this morning that we're tackling SB 91 questions and any other questions. So drop them in the chat. Should we start?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Sheila, what is the first question from last week?
And by the way, we are chatting to you globally before the Mars landing. So don't want to that's happening like in an hour.
Like if you have to decide
like between Mars and us, choose Mars. All right, every time you want to choose Mars, but we'll end before that, but we're also broadcasting live on Facebook and Zoom for your non-Facebookers.
Anyone who's looking for privacy, go ahead and change your screen name. We use first names, but this is recorded and this is available for other people afterwards. So those are our housekeeping bits. Let's go ahead and take the first question. This one comes in from Emily. She wants to confirm single-family homes are exempt from rent increase. So this sounds like a California question. We do want to stipulate which state this is coming out of when you guys are writing in or throwing us the questions.
So Emily, that's a great question. If you are in California, the first thing you need to do is check your local jurisdiction. There might be some mandates that you need to be aware of. At a high level, AB 1482 is relegated to multifamily and single family homes are exempt from that. But AB 3088 took AB 1482 and basically blanketed all non-exempt properties, meaning that your property you can't ask your tenants to leave, but you can increase rents. There's certain areas in our market, we live in Marin County in the Bay Area, where we're allowed to increase rents, but we have rent caps of 5% plus CPI for that specific area, up to 10% in any 12-month period. So that's a very long-winded, complicated answer to your question, which is yes, but check your local mandates around that. And if you have any further questions, talk to a real estate landlord tenant attorney in your area.
Yeah, and they'll usually give you a quick answer for free if it's just a simple question like that. But I will say for everyone listening from other states, it's not just California where we have these eviction protections and where you have rent caps. And from talking to other property management company owners throughout the US, because we do have an extensive network, so we can kind of keep an eye on what's going on in other states. Just like in California, it varies state by state, and it varies within the state what the rules are. So in California, we may actually have a rent freeze on one particular area and then not in another area. So it is complex right now, and there is no one answer for California, and there's no one answer for all the other states right now.
So that's a good answer. The answer is there's no one answer.
Right, but what we are seeing a common confusion that's going on in our particular area and in California is people are thinking single family homes are exempt from all this hubbub that's going on about the eviction moratoriums and all that. That is not true. The CDC actually nationwide is the one putting out the blanket moratoriums, and those affect everyone throughout the nation. And then when you get down to your local municipality area, then there are different rules.
Right.
So there's no one answer to that question, but do not think anyone, no matter what state, no matter where you are, do not think because you have a single family home that you are automatically exempt from any of these rules. You need to know definitively based on your area what your rules are.
I guess the test that you want to give yourself is, do I know, is this true or not? Do I know this 100%? And if there's any uncertainty, check it out.
Yeah. And also your first call doesn't necessarily have to be to an attorney. It could be to your local landlord association, and they might be able to tell you. But as we found out with the San Francisco Apartment Association, we were trying to call for a question for a San Francisco property. They're actually not taking calls because there's such a high volume of calls. So you may actually have to call the attorney.
Right.
You can always pay to get an answer.
Exactly. California Apartment Association, if anybody is looking at us from California or watching us from California, they are a wealth of information. They also have some free stuff and free videos to watch, or you can pay like a nominal fee to watch some of their videos, which do detail some of these new bills that are in place currently.
Okay, next question. We have, and Sheila, do you mind when you're putting these questions up, can you put them to everyone? Oh, I think you have, sorry. Question from Brenda, no location mentioned. I inherited a tenant, 0 payment since May 2020, and I just resumed this January. When can I evict the tenant? Okay, so I believe this was a leftover question from last week, so I do believe this is a California question. Sounds like she's inherited a tenant, no payments since May 2020, not a new story. I'm not sure what I just resumed this January means.
That might mean that they just started paying rent again.
Maybe. But then she says, when can I evict? So it sounds like the main question, you've got a tenant who's not paying, when can you evict? So this is subject in California, you're going to be subject to SB 91. So no evictions for a non-paying tenant if they are claiming COVID hardship until at least June, and that could get pushed out further. If you're in another state, you're going to be regulated by your state's regulations and then by the national CDC. So I'm pretty sure that one is pushed forward. We should know this.
Yeah. So let me just tailor Darcy's answer to your question. If you're in California, you cannot terminate a tenancy based on non-payment of rent, and you cannot give notice to terminate tenancy until currently July 1st. So everything stays in play until January 30th. What also stays in play is they don't have to pay you that full amount of rent until the end of June 30th. And then you could terminate tenancy, and then you can file in small claims court for any damages currently as of August 1st. So everything got pushed out from March 1st. Now it's August 1st is when you can start your initial filing.
In California.
In California.
And again, every state is different with how they're handling this, and every state is different with how they're handling the rent relief that was just approved by the federal government.
So next question.
All right, wasn't it stated, so I know this one's a California one as well, wasn't it stated that as of February 1st, landlords could ask tenants to become current on their past due rent? No, that was the case last year, and then it got extended when SB 91 passed. And that they have until September 1st to get back into balance. No, that's incorrect. Also, was it announced that as an alternate, landlords could accept 25% of what was owed to be paid by the state of California?
No.
That's
so let me just go into detail about that. So AB 3088 went into effect on September 1st, 2020. And basically what it said is that tenants now could pay they could pay as little as 25% of the monthly rent due between September and the end of January 2021, and that the full payment of that 25%, meaning you could pay, you could hold off paying that 25% until the end of January of 2021. That final payment was due. That has now been pushed out to June 30th. So now they don't have to pay that 25% until the end of June of 2021. Now, with respect to the what you can expect from California, California has also introduced as part of SB 91 there was a rental relief to help landlords, but you have to apply, you have to collaborate with your tenants, and they have to be eligible. And currently, eligibility starts if the tenant is making 80% or less than the median income for that area. And how they're going to be distributing funds once that goes into effect. And by the way, in California, you can start applying for this rent relief as of March 15th, 2021. But how they're going to start applying that is going to be in 3 tiers. First tier is for anybody any eligible tenant who's making 50% or less of the median income for that area. Tier 2 is for communities that are affected by COVID, have COVID hardships that are disproportionate compared to the other communities in the area. And then tier 3 is for everybody else that qualifies based on that 80% median income eligibility.
Sheila, can you go ahead and drop the link to last week's in-depth webinar on SB 91? So what we did last week, for anyone who missed it, is we took a very complicated bill and we broke it down into about 20 minutes, where we give you the bullet point high level that you need to know.
How did you do that? That sounds like, what was that movie with Matt Damon where they shrank everybody down and put him into a place? What was that called? I forgot. That was a recent movie. Anyway.
Yeah. So that's the webinar that we did last week, and we brought on our attorney Barrett Schaefer. He's a specific California landlord tenant attorney. So we have that link that's on our I think the business page for the landlord code, and then Sheila, if you could drop the link so anyone can visit that who needs it. That's going to go into more. It's too much to try to sum up the entirety of what SB 91 is. Also,
if you go to CaliforniaApartmentAssociation.org or .gov or whatever that is, California Apartment Association, they do have a free video going over SB 91 that you can watch with a lot of great information.
I like our video personally,
but I'm just saying, if you want even more information, that's another option. I love this question. Bonnie says, I rented to 3 people when I left the state. I think she's thinking California. When I left California, how do I handle the new forms I have to fill out? Great question.
So Sheila, can you go ahead and drop the link to, and again, this is for California, this is from CAA to Form 405. So this is the form that, because of SB 91, is due by February 28th. You must serve this form to your tenants if you have anyone who is late on their rent and is claiming COVID hardship.
Late or has deferred rent anywhere, anytime between March of 2020 and today.
Yeah. So
and anybody going forward after after February has to you have to fill out this form. Anybody who defers rent or is late on rent for whatever reason, you need to give them this form.
And then Sheila and Dorothy, can you make sure all these links are dropped into the Facebook chat as well, so that the links are tied
And the reason why you need to give this form to them now is because you need to notify them of their rights, and you cannot serve them with any sort of notices, 15-day pay or quit, or search for damages until this form has been given, served to them, and also filed as part of the paperwork.
Right. And it's worth noting that, so this is new legislation, right? 40 pages, tiny font, on top of the past new legislation, on top of the past new legislation. And while we might be speaking about California specifically, every state has their own version of what California is doing. You have to stay on top of the legislation if you want to protect your rights as a landlord to be able to go after that money in some shape or form someday when you're allowed to. You have to follow the legislation, and you have to stay up to date to the T with your obligations to complete this paperwork. If you do not, when eventually your case comes before a judge, this is exactly the type of thing that gets your case kicked out right away. The judges are leaning very tenant sympathetic, and they are going to be much more likely to side with the tenant. If you have skipped something important and required, like in this case, it's Form 405, but there was some other form before that our team's been busy serving.
It was the declaration page.
Thank you.
And here's the thing. My experience dealing with going to small claims court, and by the way, in California and likely in other states, these rent deferral damages are going to be held in small claims court because it's just easier. But my experience dealing with judges in small claims court is they just don't want to, they work very hard for a living. They work very hard to get to that position. They don't want to work hard to like read through your case. The more simple you can make it for them, the clearer you can make it for them, the better the outcome for you, the better the results that you're going to get from them. So if you can say, hey, look, I filed on this day, this day, this day, all your paperwork has been filed, it's peppered perfectly, everybody knows what's happening, you're going to fare much better than the person next to you who hasn't done that.
Right. And this is the time, this is the cry to DIY landlords. If you needed a swift kick in the butt to start treating your property not like a hobby and treating it like the business that being a landlord, being in the landlord business is, this is that swift kick. But so hands up for everyone who's been waiting for the butt kick, because like who doesn't.
I get that every day, so I'm gonna keep my hands down, but I do appreciate it. The other thing is that, you know, you make a great point about transitioning from the hobby to the business. And the thing is, whether or not you've inherited a property, you've come into a property, you purchased a property, you didn't do these things or get these things for it to be a pain for you, for it to be frustration, for it to be a source of irritation and anger for you. You got it to help build your wealth, and you need to treat it and respect it as such. And running it like a business is paramount. And I get really amped up about it because I think it's so important. But just consider that you have this thing now.
Just like $1 million.
And it's expensive. I mean, gosh, it's expensive. It's more expensive than your Jordans or whatever shoe you're looking at or whatever you want to buy, a car.
Are you buying shoes?
You're buying I think I buy, you know, my tennis shoe game is on point. Like I love tennis shoes. I run, right? So that's what I do. But it's more expensive. You should think more about it into it. So I'm going to leave it at that. But if you want me if you really want me to rant at you, you can call me up. I've got a 900 number, 900 rant, and I'll definitely rant at you about being a landlord. But go ahead. Next question.
Next question. So I'm sorry, wait, back to that. So back to Bonnie's question. So we dropped the link
for
the form 405.
Bonnie, we forgot about you.
So 405 has detailed instructions, and it says on the link from CAA, and CAA has graciously made this available for free to everyone. You don't have to be a member. They have the instructions because you must serve the form a specific way.
So on CAA, they have the form you can download, and you can also download the instructions. You want to download both files.
It says right here, do not use this form without reading the instructions. So read the instructions.
So part of that is you want to mail it. And I know that for sure. You're likely going to want to mail it and send a separate letter to each person in the property. So don't send one, expect everybody to read it. address it to each tenant in your property so they all have that same form. Okay.
Okay, next question from Karen. She says, what can landlords do to have a voice in these decisions, as it is very unfair?
Shout out to Marin Real Estate Agents showing up. What's up, Karen?
Karen, that's a great question. And again, we're going to point to CAA for California landlords. If you get on their email list, if you're a member, it's very inexpensive. If you only own 1 or 2 properties, it's expensive as a property management company to join, but as an individual member, it's very affordable. You get on their email list. So you'll get emailed a call to action. They'll often have listed who your representative is, who to call. And it's a really great way to stay in the know. Even though it's called California Apartment Association, it's a great resource for single family as well. And if you're in another state, go to your state's association. And most of them, again, are very affordable to join for a mom and pop landlord who only own a handful of rentals. And they will help keep you up to date and help keep you involved with the call to actions in your local area.
So they've been very successful at terminating a lot of bills that have come down the pipe over the past 12 months.
Or modifying, right?
Well, they've killed a lot of bills. I mean, they've sent out these calls to actions. Landlords and property managers and other people who are advocates of landlord rights essentially have responded, and they've killed a lot of bills. So yes, what you're seeing seems unfair, but let me tell you, there's been some really ridiculous bills that have been put out there that got crushed. So there's been a lot of wins. You're seeing the losses, but there's been a lot of wins. So definitely, if you want to get involved, check out CAA, join their group. And I say this to everybody, no matter what state you're in, join your local association so you can stay in the know, because what's happening is that the nation as a whole is becoming more tenant friendly. It's becoming more of a tenant state, and there's more tenants than landlords. So you need to voice your opinion. You need to put it out there. I don't want to say get out and vote, but get out and vote. Like, you need to do your job to make sure that you're protected.
Right. And this is not to say we are a pro-landlord organization, but this is not to say that we are anti-tenant, right? We're all about giving support for where it's needed. But what we're seeing right now, the problem with the legislation is there's been relief for tenants and protections for tenants. There is not relief for mom and pop landlords. And in a lot of cases, people are just selling, they're getting out. And that is negatively impacting where we're seeing right now, the Marin rental market, which had low inventory to begin with. We're seeing a lot of our sellers be like, I'm out, I'm selling, I'm done with this. And so that makes less inventory, which then brings rental prices up and demand up, but it makes it also in
so what they're doing is they're bottlenecking the rental. What they're trying to deal with, rent control and eviction protection and protecting the tenants, is a good mission. I believe in it wholeheartedly. Tenants need to be protected. They do not need to get taken advantage of. But if you put these rules down on landlords, what's happening is that you're bottlenecking the rental industry, and landlords are less enthusiastic about owning properties, and it's actually going to cause a deficit in the number of rentals that are available for tenants, and it's going to have the adverse effect of what people are trying to go for. So get out there. The great thing about these associations is that they're local. It's not like voting in an electoral college for the president. You can make a significant impact by acting locally, because that's how they're actually creating these bills and getting them passed.
Okay, next question from Matthew. If a tenant stopped paying rent prior to the moratorium, can a seller evict? Okay, so this would depend on a couple of things. I believe this was a rollover question, so this is specifically asking about California as well. So Matthew, it would depend if that tenant has since started to claim COVID hardship. So that's the trigger. If a tenant raises their hand, claims COVID hardship, completes the paperwork, they may or may not have to provide proof depending on what their income was and how you collected before. They would, if they're claiming COVID hardship, they're covered by SB 91, so you cannot evict until California says you can. If they stop paying prior, and we actually have this going, right? There was an eviction in process right when COVID happened. All the courts shut down, right? So no one could evict anything. There was a hot minute when some of those backlog evictions came up this summer, but
so the new rule is, so you can't evict right now for non-payment of rent. For all other cases, and this is outlined in SB 91, you can start. So right now you can't file claims until August 1st for non-payment of rent, but you can start filing those claims as of July 1st for anybody else. So it sounds like this tenant that you're referencing in your question is someone who would fall into that latter category, where they had infractions or breach of contract prior to COVID, and now you can start filing. So if they, right now you're kind of in the same boat as everybody else. You can't really do anything until they open up the courts for you start filing for other civil cases.
And Sheila, can you send me a couple of the questions from the email this morning? All right, Barbara asked, how do you deal with, oh, this is a good one. How do you deal with a high earner, self-employed tenant who is behind on rent and proposed reducing his rent by 20%? So we've seen a lot of this in our portfolio. And while this advice is going to, again, be specific to California, this is going to apply to a lot of other states who are renting on the higher end and a higher, if you look at the median income, if your tenant is a higher income. So there's two things strategy-wise and mindset-wise that you need to ask yourself, right? One, what's the cost to me if I get this tenant out, right? What's my current rental market look like? What's the current value of your rent? What would your projected vacancy rate be? Are you going to be having to pay an agent, or if you're an agent or doing it yourself, what's the impact on your time? So what's that, let's say you can get this person out, what's that impact to have a vacancy under today's conditions looking like for you? If it looks good, right? If your home is desirable and the rent is higher than what the tenant's behind on, then maybe that's a good move to proceed. But that said, you can't really evict right now.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I think it's subjective in a lot of respects, where tenants are like, I'm facing a hardship, and you're like, well, I saw how much money you made.
Because I qualified you on the way in.
How hard can it actually be, right? And so asking for this reduction, I would say that a 20% reduction in their current rent right now is certainly much better than them only paying you 25% or withholding that 25% until June 30th, when they have to pay all of that 25%, and then you have to take them to small claims court on August 1st for the balance. So if you can negotiate something, maybe temporarily, maybe something through the end of July or through the end of June, hey, I will give you a 20% reduction on your rent through this period to help you out, to keep the conversation going so you guys can keep up rapport and relations. That would probably be a more savvy business move than like fighting them now. Because fighting them now is going to ultimately end up reducing the money that you're going to collect from them, at least for the next 6 months.
So for example, we have a high earning tenant in one of our properties that I think was renting for $7,500 a month. This tenant earned over $300,000 a year when he originally qualified with us. And he started claiming COVID hardship, and he filled out all the paperwork as required, and then provided proof that he earned, I think it was like $3,000 less, right? So here's the problem with COVID hardship. There's no like established criteria for what that is. So almost anyone can claim COVID hardship, right? Especially someone who's self-employed. Anyone can finagle their P&L to show what it needs to show, right? So if this person wants to, they can claim COVID hardship. They can only have to pay you 25%. They can have a stay on their eviction until it all gets shaken out in court. Now, when we spoke to our attorney about our particular case in our portfolio, he said, look, it sounds like this is someone taking advantage of the situation. And you could present this you could present it to the tenant and say, look, we believe that you are not operating within the intent of the tenant protections allowed. And we intend to prosecute to the full ability and collect blah, 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 as soon as we're allowed to. Something along those lines. And what we always recommend wherever you are is showing the tenants the running debt. And we found that it's useful for them to see this debt that they are accumulating to you. So in this case, this guy started accumulating, $20,000, $30,000 worth of debt, and we're showing him this running total. Eventually, that was enough to motivate him to start negotiating. Yeah.
So just to put it in perspective, his hardship was retaliatory, and in a lot of respects.
So the owner wouldn't put in window covers.
Yeah, there was a repair that couldn't be made, and he was retaliatory. It sounds like your situation is a little bit different. Like he's proposing this 20% reduction. So just by using the language proposed, that seems to me there might be some sort of space to negotiate. So maybe he's asking for 20%. Maybe you can't do 20%, but you can do 15 or 10. So I would just say, hey, look, I want to work with you, but here's what I need, and I want to help you. Is this something that we can work out? And as long as you approach it from a place that you want to help him, but you also need to take care of yourself, I'm sure you'll be able to come to some common ground. But again, it's better to collect something than nothing, because nothing is going to ultimately harm you and destroy any kind of relationship with this tenant going forward.
Even though someday you may be able to collect, right? Because if this guy's making above the median income, it sounds like he's not going to qualify for any of the renter's assistance. And again, what we are seeing is as these high earners who are behind and are kind of taking advantage of the system start to recognize the state aid is not going to help them. They start to recognize the validity of this rental bill, that this debt they're accumulating to you. And that's when we're seeing more people being willing to negotiate. So when you're negotiating this rent reduction, be sure you're also negotiating getting this back rent paid, right? He doesn't get the reduction without starting to pay and get on some kind of payment.
Or have a deadline or something like that. But like, think it through. If you have, other questions, you can always approach us, direct message us, and maybe we can have a different conversation. Shane asks, he's curious as to what we see as downsides to a month-to-month lease rather than 1 year. Zero downside, in my opinion. If you have a tenant on a month-to-month lease right now, maybe their lease is rolled over from a 12-month lease into a month-to-month lease. Right now, that's sort of where you're at. You can't ask them to leave. They can stay pretty much on a month-to-month lease until June 30th. And then on July 1st, you can give them notice to leave. And that'll be a 60-day notice at this time. So right now on a month-to-month, I don't think there's any downside. The upside is that if they're a single-family home, you can increase rent. And in California, that's 5% plus CPI up to 10%. So, look at that. And that's an upside for you.
And I'm going to give
any 12-month period.
I'm going to give a slightly different point of view to yours. Probably what I would say is it depends on where you're located. It depends on the cycle and the rental cycles that in a typical year to expect. So like some people maybe who operate in a ski resort area, right, might have a rental there. It might be very important to keep your rental on a specific cycle. Here where we own our property management company, the spring is really when we want our rentals, especially if they're higher end. So there is an advantage to getting your tenant to agree to sign a 1-year lease for a cycle, assuming this is a tenant you're trying to keep, to sign a 1-year lease so that cycle stays in the amount where you can always get the maximum amount. So the disadvantage, if the tenant is on a month-to-month, they can leave. The owner has no control. They could be leaving over Christmas, right? Which in most markets is a pretty poor time of year to have a vacancy. So I would probably, if it's a tenant who's giving you trouble, you definitely don't want to renew, let them go month-to-month. But if it's someone who's well qualified and you're trying to keep in the property, I would suggest whatever lease term is best for your property in your area. And the way we're approaching it with renewals in our portfolio this year is if people want to hold over on a month-to-month, because like Christopher said, anyone can right now, that's one rate, they get the raised rent. But if they will sign a 1 year or whatever term it is our landlord client needs, then we give them a preferred rate. So there's an incentive to sign while they don't have to right now.
Yeah, so normally I would agree with Darcy 100% because that's how I've always pitched that. Like, hey, you want to be set up in the spring cycle, Q2, Q3. It's always going to benefit you long term. You're always going to have a decrease days on market and an increased rental rate during those periods. Historically, it's always happened despite the crash. This year, I'm taking a different approach. It's different this year. This year, I'm saying, hey, I'm more conservative. Hedge your bets. If you have any reason to believe that your tenants could be a little shaky on income, anything can change, right? You want to have a little bit of latitude if you have to serve notice and get them out and start over, so.
Yeah. And what we do historically in our market is we'll give tenants a little bit of flexibility in the spring. If they want month-to-month for a few months, we can usually do that. But by late spring or early summer, we're looking for that commitment because again, what we don't want to do is roll into the winter with a vacancy. But if you're just looking for a little bit of flexibility, usually in most markets, you can give that. Because everyone right now, overwhelmingly in the market, what people are looking for is flexibility because of all the things that everyone knows about.
So,
all right, let's do one last question and then we'll wrap it up for today.
Heidi's question is similar to Shane's question. Heidi wants to know, has anything changed about lease renewal for single family homes? Could the landlord choose not to renew for single family home? What if it's a month-to-month lease for a single family home? What if the lease is short-term, 8-month lease or 8-month lease or less? So this sort of coincides with the last question. I actually asked this question in a conversation with our attorney 2 days ago. And that was, and he said, look, you cannot actually give anybody notice to leave, but you can pose the question saying, hey, tenant, your lease is up on March 31st. Do you intend to renew? And they could say yes, or they could say, no, I'm out, and that's great, they're gonna be leaving. But if they say, no, actually, yes, I'm intending to renew, then you say, okay, well, it'll go month-to-month until the end of June, and we'll have a different conversation. And by the way, here's your rent increase. So right now, if the tenant does not want to leave, they don't have to in a single family home, but you are able to increase the rent per your local jurisdictions. And again, this question, I'm assuming, is from California. Other states, you need to check that out. But yes, that's what I would recommend doing right now.
Okay, and that's
Good.
actually a nice segue into our topic for next week.
Next
So,
week,
the show,
the
right?
show,
The show.
we're going to be
Next
talking
week.
about rappers,
We are. We're
rappers
talking
and
about
big houses,
big houses.
the whole rapper lifestyle we're going to be focusing on. And
We're going to be talking about a couple $100,000 worth of damage done to a property that we came across, all because of one mistake and one thing that this landlord didn't do.
and it wasn't popping bottles. I promise you that. It was
Bottles
some-
were popped. in this
bottles,
house.
lots of bottles were popped.
Bottles were popped in this house.
Yeah.
So we are going to cover that next week. That will be next Thursday, same bat time, same bat channel. You can catch us on Facebook. You can catch us on our email list. You can catch us on our YouTube channel. And
And if you want to learn more about how to get out of this hobby syndrome and